Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and in case you haven't noticed, there's been a spike in racial tension lately across America, particularly in New York City. And I thought this was a great opportunity to have a conversation about race. And actually, it wasn't even my idea. The person that reached out to me that about having this conversation, and I thought it was a wonderful idea, is Miss Susan Patton, and she's known as the Princeton Mom. Now, what I love about Susan is that political correctness goes out the window because she's more focused on truth and honesty. She'd rather be correct than to be politically correct, and so I wanted to have this conversation with her. And so, before I get started, I want to ask Susan, how are you doing today?
Fantastic, Dr. Boyce. How are you?
I'm doing really well, really well. And people, I should tell people that you and I literally just spent an hour and 15 minutes talking about race in America and the distrust between whites and blacks. And I thought this was a great idea for us to have this conversation. I'm glad you brought it up because I thought about it and I said, I talk to a lot of black people, but I don't get to talk to a lot of white people about this kind of thing, especially not honest people. And you're honest, you're
I,
fearless. You say what's on your mind, and I respect you for that. And so I want to start by basically mentioning something that you brought up when we first started talking today. You mentioned that one of the things that's missing is that we don't have the ability to talk to each other with trust, respect, comfort, intelligence, and love.
right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm in New York, as you know, and there's been so much racial tension and unrest in New York because of recent occurrences. And I keep thinking about how you and I have had many conversations, and we're able to talk about just about anything. We may not agree on everything, but we're certainly able to communicate with each other. And I think that's because we trust each other. I know you're not going to hurt me, and you know I'm not going to disrespect you. And I think with that understanding, it allows for an open exchange of thoughts and ideas. How do we translate that? How do we communicate? How do we broadcast that to a broader community, to a broader audience, so that the ways in which black people and white people talk with each other, not at each other, not about each other, but with each other, are strengthened, are made positive, are made productive. Um, so I just keep thinking, what is it? What is the secret sauce that you and I have here, Dr. Boyce, that we can that we can share with your audience and my audience? What is it? What is it that we are able to do with each other that how I wish, and I'm sure you do too, could be shared in a broader platform?
I've always called for conversations on race. Honest discussions and honest dialogues, and I think that there are a lot of people that are capable of doing this. But what's difficult is that it's a very fragile conversation, right? All it takes is for one person to to say something that
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense, or one negative reaction for it to all kind of fall apart.
right.
And so it almost seems to me that large scale honest conversations are really difficult, much more so than one-on-ones, maybe small groups, things like that. So I would almost recommend to people that they get to people who think differently from themselves, and not just speak with honesty, but also focus as much or more on listening
Yeah,
than on talking. I mean, what do you
yeah.
think about that?
I completely agree, and I there's little I love more than talking with people who disagree with me, because this is how I learn. Talking with people who think exactly as I do, well, I already got that. I've already got that camp covered. Tell me something I don't know. Tell me why you disagree with me, because clearly you see something that I'm not seeing, because you're digging your heels in just like I always dig my heels in. What is it that you see that I don't see? So I love that we can exchange that sort of information and perspectives. I'm not a black man, you're not a white woman, but there are times I feel like I could, I have insight into what's in your head in the way that I hope that you have insight into what's in my head, because we've been able to exchange our opinions in an honest and trusting and loving way, even though we don't always agree.
Well, what's interesting is that when you and I were talking about our backgrounds, I actually mentioned to you that you reminded me a little bit of my best friend's mother, and I was probably being stereotypical when I said it because my best friend was Jewish, and he had a Jewish mom, and there was a different kind of culture in his household, and it led me to have a lot of respect for Jewish culture, at least based on what I was exposed to. And you also said that when you went to public school, that you said you look at some of your old pictures, and you were the only white kid in the picture many times.
I went to New York City public schools in the Bronx. I didn't even realize until recently when I looked. Oh my God! Look at that! I was like the only white kid I was the only white kid in the class. In many cases, I completely forgot that. I didn't see it. It didn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary because it's all I knew until I got to Princeton, and the balance, the ethnic balance, obviously shifted dramatically because I went all through public school in New York, as did my children before getting to college. But wow, and I think that what colors the way I look at Black people is the fact that I went to school with them. I never had a problem. Well, I didn't have any more of a problem with any of the Black kids than I did with anybody else. I remember being tormented by one girl, white girl. She was just a bully, just one of those mean girls. I sort of remember that. But no, I can't say that I don't recall ever having a problem with a Black kid in my class. Not ever. And I have a funny story for you. My older son rather, when he was in public school here in New York City, there was a kid in the class, a Black kid. His name was James. Last name doesn't matter, but his name was James. And he was sort of a troubled kid, and he was the kid that the teacher was always yelling at, and he was Well, at the beginning of the year, I wasn't quite sure I knew who James was. So Daniel and I, my son and I, were walking home from school one day, and I hear the parents talking about, oh, James this, oh, James. And I say to Daniel as we're walking home, is he the little Black boy in your class? And Daniel says to me, no. I said, oh, okay. Didn't think anything of it. The next day, I'm asking around among the parents. The kids are at first grade or in kindergarten. And yes, he is indeed. James isn't. So that day, that afternoon, I'm walking home with Daniel, and I say to him, Daniel, I asked you yesterday whether James was the little Black boy in your class. Why did you tell me no? He said, because he's not Black. I said, what do you mean he's not Black? He said, but he's really sort of brown, don't you think?
Wow, now that's hilarious. That is so funny. Well, that's interesting. When you tell me your story and you tell me how you grew up, and you say that in your environment it was definitely multicultural, if not, it almost sounds like you were the minority.
I was ready.
Okay, and then you go to Princeton, and there's a shift in race and class and everything else. Right. So when you go to Princeton and you're hearing these conversations that occur when Black people are not around, was there anything about these discussions that maybe surprised you or disappointed you, or maybe gave you insight into how whites might see people of color?
Well, there are so many things. The first thing that my first experience at Princeton over the summer before I began my freshman year, I got a letter from the housing office, whatever, telling me that my roommate's name, I'm changing it a little because she may not want me to say it, but her name was Daphne Washington from Newark, New Jersey. Okay, so I think my roommate is a Black girl, right? Wouldn't you make that assumption? Unusual first name, last name Washington from Newark, New Jersey. Must be a Black girl. Fine by me. Didn't matter to me. I've gone to school with Black kids all my life. Well, she similarly got a letter that said that her roommate was going to be Susan Patton from the Bronx. What assumption did she make?
That you were Black?
Correct.
Wow.
If I tell you how disappointed she was when I showed up. Don't be laughing, boys. This is the truth. She was, I'll never forget her face. I will never forget her face. When she opened the door and I said, "Hi, Daphne, I'm Susan." And she said, "You're white."
Wow.
Well, yes, I am. Okay, well, so what Princeton did back in the day, this is in the mid-70s, they had all of the Black students, of which there was maybe 10% of the freshman class was Black. They were all on campus for 2 weeks before the white students came to campus. And the thinking was, this way they can become more acclimated to the environment and get to know each other and have sort of a support system before the year began. Well, I guess in theory that was okay, but the problem was, and it persisted for the next 4 years, the black students always stayed together. There was the black students' table at the dining halls. There was the black students. The black students had become so insular because they started their Princeton experience with 2 weeks of exclusivity just with themselves that it was almost impossible to infiltrate. By the end of freshman year, my roommate Daphne and I, we became good pals. There was a time she was dating Randy Kennedy, who was a classmate of mine. Do you know Randy Kennedy? You must know Randy
Yes.
Kennedy.
Well, I know the Kennedys.
No, Randy Kennedy, you should know. Randy Kennedy he taught up at Harvard. He's a classmate of mine, but he taught up at Harvard. He's written many books. The book that I think got the most publicity, I'm not going to say it, but it's the N-word. That's the name of the book he wrote.
Oh, I know. Okay, I know you're talking
You know
about.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So my roommate at one point dated Randy Kennedy, brilliant Rhodes Scholar, brilliant. But it's interesting that even now, 35, 40 years later almost, I'm president of my class at Princeton, and I try very hard to bring black students, my black classmates, back into, come to reunions, join in class activities. You know, I'm planning class events and class parties all the time, and black students, my black classmates, almost none of them want any part of reunions or getting together with. I mean, a couple of them do, and that's great. But there was such a divide, and I wonder whether the university did a disservice to everybody, to everybody, by segregating the incoming class like that 40 years ago or 41 years ago now, because it led to it created an insular. It was a segregated class then, and in so many ways it still feels like a segregated class. I don't know how to overcome that. I've reached out to black classmates. I regularly do. I so hope that in time, as we get older, and more of us are having sort of more discretionary time as we become empty nesters, I'm so hoping to bring black classmates back to reunions and to participate. But it's hard. It's hard. Many of them didn't have a good experience. Well, Michelle Obama didn't have a good experience on campus. You know that she's class of '85.
You know, that's a very interesting story you described, and I think it's important for people to hear it from your perspective because, I think that I think it's informative for people that don't necessarily know how someone else might perceive the very same experience that they had, right? You all had the same Princeton experience at the same time, but you saw it in different ways, right?
Very different.
And
Very, very different.
And when I think about why there might be, before we had forced segregation and then we had integration, but now we have voluntary segregation in many cases, and
Right.
it makes me think about when I try to understand exactly why that might happen. I think about, for example, why in Chicago there's a Chinatown, right? I drove through it yesterday, so it was on my mind. And one of the thoughts that that I came to is that perhaps the reason that even though they can go anywhere they want to be in Chinatown is because things are familiar.
Of course.
The world is made for them. The Walgreens had Chinese on the sign. And it's their world where there's a degree of comfort there, right? So as opposed to the awkwardness that you might feel, where someone may be very welcoming to you, but you're in their house, in their space, playing by their rules, with their customs. And I imagine that lack of familiarity can not just be uncomfortable, but in the event that there's even a conflict, you're almost always going to lose, right? Because I compare that to my experience at University of Kentucky. When I went there weren't that many black kids there, and I can't necessarily pick out. I mean, I could pick out a few white people who mistreated me, but that wasn't a big deal. It was really almost like the environment mistreated me. It was in fact, I never, I went all the way to school through my master's, PhD, and everything. I've never, ever, ever once, and I've taken a lot of classes. I've never had a black professor ever in my life, and I've taken a ton of classes, and so, and that's just one area where you feel like you're away from home, right? And everybody wants to be home, right? So you're in this environment. Everything's kind of done for everyone else, and everything's kind of set up almost like it was an environment just created for other people. And it's not a matter, I think, of people always treating you badly. It's just a matter of saying, "Gosh, I feel kind of lost out here. I want to kind
Yeah,
of blend
yeah.
in, but this isn't really for me." So maybe what happens then is you go and you sit with the table with the black kids, or you go live in the section of the campus with the black kids, and suddenly everything is familiar. The music, the people, even romantic relationships, like the
There's
chance to.
safety in numbers. There's safety in numbers. You
Right.
want to feel like, like you have people
Yeah.
around you who get you and who aren't going to be mistrustful of you, aren't going to be threatening of you, aren't going to be threatened by you. Yeah, I get that. I get
Right.
that.
So maybe what Princeton could have done, and I'm sure they do something like this now. It's a good school, is maybe allow people to have that familiarity by sort of being a part of whatever group they want, but creating scenarios where you have to work together, right?
Well,
Obviously,
it's interesting. Yes, they do. And first, let me correct what you just said, that Princeton is a good school. Princeton is the best school. But okay, that was a little mistake you made, boys. I know you just misspoke yourself. It's the best school.
I
Okay.
misspoke.
Right. It's interesting that the university frequently has hosted special conferences on campus for returning alumni, and they just had one for the third time. It was called the Coming Back Conference, and it's specifically for black alumni. This is the third time they've done it, and they've done it 5 years ago and 10 years ago, and they just did it in October of this year. It's open to all alumni. And when I got this invitation in the mail, when I got this notice in the mail that the Coming Back conference was going to be in October, I thought, I would like to go to this conference. I would like to go to this conference. And the reason I want to go to this conference is I want to demonstrate my support of this program and programs like this that the university is hosting. I thought this is okay. But before I signed up for it, I called one of my besties over at the Alumni Council, a black girl, Marguerite. I called Marguerite and I said, "Would it be all right? Do you think can I register for this? I would sort of like to be on campus for this. These are fabulous conferences that are filled with all kinds of educational opportunities and social opportunities. There's food. There's and I love being on campus. But I called my bestie at the alumni council just to make sure, and she's a woman of color, just to make sure I'm not doing the wrong thing. And she said, "Of course, Susan, absolutely. You're a class president. You should absolutely be there." Great. So I register. It's all good. A couple of weeks later, one of my classmates, a woman of color, who I know very well, we've been friends, she sends me a Facebook message about, I don't even know whatever it was, and I answer her and I say, "Are you going to be on campus next week for the Coming Back conference?" She writes me back, "Well, yes, I am. And I noticed that you're registered. Why ever would you have done such a thing?" I thought, uh-oh. That's the first thing I thought. Uh-oh. Well, so I write her back. I registered because I want to show my support of these programs and of this program and other programs like it. I want to come to the conference because we have a couple other classmates who are speaking on a panel, and I'd like to be in the audience and support our classmates who are speaking. It's a learning opportunity. It's a chance to be, reconnected with some of my classmates that I haven't seen in decades. So that's why. Do you have a problem with that? I'm asking her. And she writes me back, "Well, I'm not enthusiastic about it." And I thought, okay, I don't get this.
Did she explain why?
Well, we exchanged a couple emails, and she said, "Let's have a conversation." I said, "That's a great idea." We spoke, and she said, "It's not my place to be there. It's not my place to be there. And if I was there, it would hamper the exchanges and the conversations and the socializing that the black people would be doing if I was there." I'm thinking, I don't get that.
Well,
I don't get that.
yeah,
I don't get that at all.
yeah. I think that I think it would be very important to separate her response, her reaction to, from the reactions of other people, right? And it is a mixed bag, I think that there might be some people who have this feeling that, and you see this a lot with blacks in corporate America. They kind
Yeah.
of feel that, okay, when when white folks are in the room, we we have to sort of, walk on pins and needles because we're going to be judged or misjudged, in ways that might potentially be unfair or whatever. So, we have this persona that we carry into the the corporate world, and then we have the way we, our other personality that comes out when we're around people that we're comfortable with, and that distrust, I think, goes all the way back to the plantation.
Well, this is it. This is what we have to. This is what we have to get at the core of. I have no reason. I have no reason to fear black people or anybody until they pose a threat to me. And white people and black people have no reason to distrust me or be uncomfortable around me until I give them reason to be uncomfortable around me. And I think this is the message that we need to share and try to address in a broader forum of, if we approach each other as you and I, Dr. Boyce, have always approached each other, with trust, with honesty, with sincerity, whether we agree or we don't agree, I think that that's what lays the groundwork for a level of communication, a depth of communication that can really make a difference in how races see each other.
Yeah, and I agree. And what I think as well is, if I were you, I still would have gone because
Well, and I wanted to go, and I didn't. I withdrew my registration because this classmate of mine, who I care about, clearly didn't want me to be there. And I thought, well, and she is a classmate who's connected to all of the other black classmates in our class.
well, I'm just not a fan of that. I don't think that's fair. I
Well, I
think
didn't love it either, but I did withdraw my registration. I didn't go to the conference, and I've regretted having done so. I think I should have gone. And, and I asked her more than once, what about my presence? I'm a pretty easygoing kind of gal. I mean, yes, I'm opinionated, whatever. I'm a party girl. Really, why wouldn't you want me there? And there was some thought about that I would be going there for the purposes of writing some kind of expose or what?
okay.
Why
So,
would you do
so,
that?
so I think okay. So what I'm seeing here is that, you know, you being a white woman was not necessarily the primary reason that she didn't want you there. I think that it also has to do with you being Susan Patton, who is as lovable as you are. Has some people that don't love you as much as I do, right?
Right.
You've been very outspoken, but actually that's what I love about you, is that I like the fact that you say things that people are afraid to
Thanks.
say, and I think that's definitely where we connected. But I'm thinking that. And I understand this as well because I've been uninvited to things because I was Boyce Watkins, not because I was black, but because I was Boyce Watkins who said
Yep, yep,
these
yep.
other things, and in fact when I was at Syracuse, I remember they deliberately promoted a couple of black people just to prove that it wasn't a black thing, right? Like,
Right.
no, we don't dislike black people, we just don't like him,
You.
right? Right. So I own that. It is what it is, whatever.
Well, but even if that's what it is, and even if it was not so much that I was a white person, but that I was whatever minor public person, I've become, so what? So you don't like my opinions? Your opinions are different than mine? My gosh, if Princeton University isn't a place where a plurality of positions and opinions and ideas can be expressed without fear, without condemnation, then I don't know what is. What's the difference that we don't agree? Who says we have to agree? This is a conversation. Who says we have to agree? I'm not a lawmaker. I'm not passing judgment on anybody. You think what you want. I think what I want. It's okay. It's all good.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and it's funny because it actually spins us back to a point I want to ask you about. Because I had something happen not too long ago. Where I wrote something that certain black feminist scholars didn't like. They couldn't explain exactly what they didn't like about it. They just said they didn't like my article, and I remember it was really interesting. I was supposed to give a keynote at the Black Doctoral Student Association conference, and they were literally going to have a protest. They're going to go out with picket signs and everything to protest the event. And again, couldn't really explain why, and it confused me because I thought, okay, I understand you not agreeing with me, but we're scholars, aren't we supposed to debate? Isn't this America? Are we supposed to all have a
Right.
right to an opinion? But you're just sort of trying to kill dissenting opinions. You're trying to
Right.
just, squash the debate with this weird bullying tactic, which shows
Right.
ignorance. I mean, it shows complete ignorance because to me, if you're a
Right.
scholar, you fight with your mind, not with
Precisely.
your fist and your picket sign and whatever, and it's stupid petty politics. So speaking of stupid petty politics, I'm going to throw out a theory, and I want you to tell me what you think about this. My
Hmm.
theory is that part of the reason that we can't have honest racial conversations is because political correctness and political faction building has polarized people so much that they are that before we try to understand the people on the other side of the table, we're quicker to demonize them and vilify them and write them off as complete idiots,
Right.
reduce an intelligent person down to a stupid soundbite, right?
Right.
And I think about what happened with you with CNN, where you went
Sure.
and you had
That's
that
right.
debate with Carolyn Costello, and you were articulate. Everything you said made perfect sense. It wasn't something that everyone's going to agree with, but you're not a dumb person. I mean, as you said, you went to Princeton. You're a smart lady, but yet these outlets like Mother Jones and other places that just don't like you, they found the shortest little sentence in what you said and tried to make it into something that it wasn't, and it just
Clearly, it was.
really, I
Right.
think, was a disservice to free thinking Americans who want to make their own opinion. Can you tell me, do you think that that's the reason why we can't have honest conversations about race in America, is because we're so quick to demonize and vilify and ostracize as opposed to working on coming together?
I do think that's part of it, but I think we don't know each other well enough. We don't know each other well enough. I mean, you said to me earlier that you have lots of close friends. Not too many of them are white. You don't have these conversations with too many white people. I don't have these conversations with too many black people, which is one of the reasons why I love talking to you. I always learn so much in our conversations because you share with me honestly what you're thinking. And even some of the times I think, oh my God, he couldn't possibly really be thinking that. I love that you share it with me, and I call you on your BS when I think it is BS, as you will call me on mine. But I think that it's so difficult for blacks and whites to have an honest conversation about race because we don't know, we don't have the language to talk with each other without, you said this earlier, you're exactly right. One wrong thing, one wrong morsel, one kernel of offense, and it escalates and it gets blown out of proportion. And I think that our racial our racist radar is ratcheted up so high. I mean, look, nobody's anti-Semitic radar is ratcheted up higher than mine. I so get it. I so get it. I sniff it out. I totally sniff it out. But I think that racist radar it's ratcheted up to the point that you can't say anything for fear that it will turn into something else, for fear that it will be misunderstood, misconstrued, taken for something that it isn't. I shared with you a few things off camera that, I told you, my young son has said to me, oh my God, don't ever say it out loud. And I won't say it on air. I hope that your viewers, your listeners, my listeners have come to know me, come to know you at this point well enough to know I would never disparage you. I would never disparage black people. You're never going to say a bad thing about Jewish people or about me. We're just not going to do that. And I think that's these kind of conversations that maybe could start to form a foundation for how black people and white people talk to each other and with each other in trust, in honesty, in truthfulness, in confidence, and in love.
Hmm. Well, It's funny, and I agree with you. I think love is always just the strongest force in the universe. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
foundation for the creation of all human life. So there's nothing stronger than that, right? When people love each other, that's when they make babies, and even if they only love each other for a couple of days. Now, getting to that, so we talk about love, and there was another emotion you mentioned, fear. And I want to ask you this, and this is my last question because we've talked for a while, and I so appreciate your time. Um, is there a when you're around, having these conversations that white folks have when black people aren't there, do you think that there is a fear of black people, particularly the black man, and if so, why?
Well, of course, there absolutely is. There absolutely is. I think that the media has portrayed, or the media has put forward statistics that inform white people that a huge proportion of violent crime in America is committed by black people. When you have people like Jesse Jackson saying, if I see four big black guys on a corner, I'm crossing the street. That's what he said, and I get that. You see four Jewish accountants on the corner, you don't have to cross the street. There's threatening, and then there's not threatening. I think that white people don't understand the rage that many black people experience, or have experienced, or experience as a result of so many things that underlie it. And I think there's fear of how that rage is going to be expressed. There's fear that is that rage going to be expressed at me because I'm a white person. I've never done a bad thing to a black person, but because I'm part of that white structure, wow, am I going to be, a target? I don't know. I don't know. But there is most certainly fear. I think white people are fearful that black people will cause them harm, physical harm. I do think that. I do think
Interesting.
that. I do
Interesting,
think.
and I appreciate your honesty on that. And I
And you would probably say that black people are fearful that white people will treat them unfairly, unkindly. Would you say that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's fear on both sides for sure, and also there's sometimes this fear of physical harm, especially when you talk about a police officer or things like that. Even the way certain people are able to view the police, it can vary depending on whether or not the officers, which are basically soldiers following orders, whether the soldiers have been trained to identify you as friend or foe, if they're from your community or not from your community. I think that can play a huge role in terms of how that whole interaction goes down. That neighborhood cop, like when my dad was a cop, and he would everybody would call him whenever there was a problem in the neighborhood. But because he was from the community, he could say, "Oh, I know this kid. I know how to deal with this." But if he wasn't from the community, right, it's a whole different story. And so, I think you're absolutely correct, and that and I think that's why I'm very happy that you reached out to have this conversation, because it's an uncomfortable kind of thing to discuss. But what I encourage people to do is spend as much time listening as you do talking. And I think the bottom line, it seems, is that we can never forget the importance of trying to get to know each other as individuals. I mean, sure, there are always going to be structural factors that have to be dealt with. I believe that. I believe there are policies and laws and systems that have to be confronted. But when you're talking about that one-on-one, you know, racial bias or whatever, I find that when I connect to a person's humanity, I almost always get them and appreciate them and like them on some
Right.
level, even if they're racist. The best example, yeah, the best example I can think of, and I'll let you get the last word. The best example I can think of is when I was a little kid. I'm almost embarrassed to tell this story, but I've got to tell it. There was a guy that lived next door to us who used to be in the KKK. I'm not kidding, right? He
Uh,
wasn't a member at that time, I don't think, but he used to be. And he,
Store at Halloween, and
yeah, there you go. And he didn't like black people. We had no idea. We were little kids. We didn't understand how racism worked. Um, but it was funny because he and my father had a an Archie Bunker George Jefferson relationship. It's like, my dad would say nasty things about him or whatever, but then he'd be over at his house with a beer watching the football game. Because they both liked football. They both had families they were trying to raise. They
Right.
had a lot of things in common that went beyond these biases that they might have had.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it doesn't solve the race problem in America. I think the race problem in America is very complex. But if you're talking about solving it in your own individual life, I think that just understanding that deep down below all the politics, there's a human being,
Right.
and most of the time, if you try to connect to that, you're going to find some kind of common ground. So I'll let you get the last word, Susan.
I agree with everything you just said. I truly do. And I'm so glad that you didn't end this conversation as we have ended so many other conversations with you telling me how I remind you of your mother. So,
No, I meant to say older sister, or not even older, maybe younger sister. I got it. There you go.
oh, that I can, that voice, I can get with that. Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I think that there's hope. There's hope for there's hope for this problem. I think that we start on a one by one basis. I think that we encourage and inspire individuals to reach out, to be open minded, to be open hearted. Uh, Give the other guy the benefit of the doubt. Don't assume that he's going to hurt you. Don't assume that he's going to abuse you. Don't assume. Go into it with a clear head, but with an open mind, and especially with an open heart. And I think that's probably the path towards improving the racial tensions that we live with, and especially at this time of year. This is a time of year that everybody gets sort of a little. I know it's the last day of Hanukkah, and I could see that you're getting all verklempt, Dr. Boyce. I could see that because it's the last day of Hanukkah. I see that. But on the eve of Christmas, let us all think good thoughts about our brothers, regardless of the color of the skin that they're in, and let us move forward in peace and in joy and in love.
All right, all right. Well, I think that's such a perfect message for Hanukkah and Christmas.
There you
I
go.
love it. I love it. So everybody
Oh,
watching, that this is part of my effort as well, and Susan's effort to give you something positive and uplifting. Because as you know, all through 2014, neither one of us said anything controversial. So I don't know where people are coming up with this stuff, but I think that this message of togetherness and just seeking. To remember that love is always stronger than hate, and not only is love good for the person that you're expressing love to, it's good for yourself. It's just healthier. So try to move forward with love and continue to be strong at the same time. Well, everybody, this is Miss Susan Patton, aka the Princeton Mom. She is the author of the book. Is it called Marrying Smart?
Mary Smart.
Marry Smart.
But your listeners can find me on Twitter at the Princeton Mom,
All right.
and I'd love to hear from them.
Yes, yes. Please reach out to her and tell her how much you enjoyed this conversation. And me, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.